Ephesians 4:17-32. That's what we're looking at this week. And reading this passage and thinking about it reminded me of when we first moved into our current house we live in. We did a lot of, not too much, but we did a decent amount of renovation when we came into that house. We did a lot of painting. There were some walls that we painted. There was even some brick around the fireplace that we painted. That was my wife's kind of vision and idea. And I think it looks, still to this day, I think it looks great. But for me, the most fun part of the renovation was when we had to take out this kind of partition wall. It was like a half wall, not even quite a bookshelf. It was just kind of there dividing two rooms that we didn't want divided. I said, hey, let's open this up. And the reason that was the most fun for me is because I got to use a sledgehammer, right? Just go to town and just swing and swing and swing and try and take out that wall that had been built in. It's not very often you get to just swing a giant sledgehammer around your house and actually have your wife's approval especially. So that was by far the most fun part of it, just to swing and swing. You really had to put some gusto into it. Now that we're still more settled into our house, there's not a lot of opportunity for me to do that. But what we did when we moved into that house is something a lot of people do, whether it's when they're moving in, whether they're trying to flip a house, whether they're just trying to add some value. They'll be changing around a bathroom, changing around different things. Right? We try and do these renovations of these houses. Right? We even like to watch shows like that. Growing up, I can remember watching Bob Vila on This Old House. Kids, look that up. It's definitely worth your time. That was Chip and Joanna Gaines before Chip and Joanna Gaines were around. Bob Vila with This Old House. We love to watch houses get renovated. It makes for great television. We don't even like this only on homes. We like this even for people. We like to see extreme makeovers. We like to see how someone, I think the kids are calling it nowadays, glows up, right? This great transformation that'll happen, that this kid's kind of a chubby Disney star, and then all of a sudden a few years later he glows up and he's some sort of hunk. We love to see these transformations. We go after them ourselves, right? I'm going to commit to exercising in these ways or changing myself in these ways. I want to see myself transformed. What's interesting about all these transformations, as good as they may be, worth our time as they may be, is the question, are any of them going to last? Like, think of every house Chip and Joanna Gaines have ever renovated. Do you think any of them needed repair by this point? Or when's the next time they're going to need a renovation? Think about that with the same with every person who's ever received a makeover, right? Big fashion makeover. Imagine if they kept dressing like that for the next 25 years. Eventually this person who looked, whoa, is now suddenly like, what's their deal? They look they are out of it. Come on, get some new clothes. Every person who's gone over a health transformation that then one day also had a funeral. As healthy as we may become, we're still going to die. These transformations don't last. But what's amazing, what we've been seeing in Ephesians has been a transformation that will last. That is what the Apostle Paul is talking to us about, showing how when we get united to Christ through faith, we go through a transformation. He doesn't call it really a transformation. It's probably best thought of as a resurrection that will last. And so here in chapter 4 and beyond, he's showing us how do we live in light of this renovation, in light of this resurrection, in light of this new life. So especially in verses 17 and following, he talks about how we need to leave the old behind. He says you must no longer walk, have the same habits as the Gentiles do, and the futility of their minds. And he goes on to describe what that's like. I encourage you, again, to be reading this passage and studying it for yourself. He unpacks what it is and why it is that the Gentiles walk in the way that they do, that all of us walk in the way we do if we don't know Christ. But he says there's a change that's happened. We've learned Christ. We've heard the good news. We've learned about who Christ is and the life he calls us to. We are learning the scriptures. And so he says in verse 20, that's not the way you learned Christ. No, what you learned, as he starts to say in verse 22, is to put off the old self. All right, think about myself taking that sledgehammer and knocking down that wall, right? There's things we got to get rid of if we're going to start living here. And we're renewed in the spirit of your mind. So we get the place ready, right, to clean up quite a bit after getting rid of that wall so that we could then repaint and put in all the new furniture and live in our house in the way we want to, in light of this renovation. So he says, we put off our old selves and we're renewed in the spirit of your minds to put on the new self. Right? To become a Christian is not just to go through a little fashion change. It's not just some surface change. It's not even just a behavior change. This is a deep recreation, resurrection. It becomes a new self by the power of the Spirit, as he says in verse 24. Created after the likeness of God in true righteousness and holiness. And then as you keep on reading in verse 25 through 32, and even on into chapter 5, Paul describes what does it look like? What does it look like to live in light of this new life, this new creation that we are? And he calls us to truly live in light of this renovation, because we're going to have this temptation to go back, this temptation to live as if nothing's changed, a temptation to live as if we were still one of the Gentiles, as if we were still dead in our trespasses and sins. So he's just calling us to this new way of life. The one example I find maybe the most interesting, and I wanted to spend a minute on this, is in verse 28, when Paul addresses the thief. And I don't think he addresses the thief because he thinks there's like one thief there in the Ephesian church that really needs to get the ear of and say, hey, you thief, I've got a word for you, and I'm going to say it in front of everybody. No, I think he addresses the thief because it's a really good example for all of us to ponder what it's like to be changed by Christ. Because notice what he says. He says, let the thief no longer steal, but rather let him labor, doing honest work with his own hands, so that he may have something to share with anyone in need. And so what did he just say there? Now, the first part is kind of obvious. No one's going to argue with that. Let the thief no longer steal, right? That's one of the 10 commandments. Thou shalt not steal. Good job. You're a Christian. It's probably a good idea. Let's obey the 10 commandments. Let's not steal anymore. Check. Well, how is the thief gonna get what he wants? How is he gonna get what he needs? How is he gonna provide for himself? A thief could be a pretty lucrative career. So now that he's not stealing, what's he supposed to do? Well, obvious, right? Let him labor, doing honest work with his own hands. And some of us would be tempted to stop there, right? That's what it means to become a Christian. You stop stealing, or you stop doing whatever bad things you are, and you just become honest. Right? You're not stealing from others. You provide for yourself. But Paul didn't stop there. Notice what he says. It's not just, be able to rely on yourself. Don't steal. Rely on yourself. Learn to fish for yourself, and you'll provide yourself fish every day, right? No, he says, you do the honest work with your hands so that, how would we Americans finish that sentence? We could be self-reliant, not a burden to other people. But how does Paul finish that? A thief does honest work so that he may have something to share with anyone in need. I think this is a perfect picture of what it means to be transformed by Christ. It's not just that we're called away from old bad things, that there's all these thou shalt nots that we really need to stop. And so now that we're Christian, we should stop them. Of course, that's true. But it's this stopping, having this complete inward, self-focused, sin-stuck orientation to being turned outward in love. And that's actually where he'll go even more in chapter 5, right? Where he says, be imitators of God as beloved children and walk in love. Not just self-reliance, not just avoiding being a burden, but love, actively working hard, earning that paycheck, earning whatever it is you're earning, so that you can give it. You can become more like Christ. You can be an imitator of God, the one who you've been raised with Christ. You can become like him, not having these riches for yourself, not counting these things as something to just be used for your own gain, but be willing to give. And as Paul walks through in this letter, we'll see all sorts of examples where he points us. This is what it looks like to be made new. So I pray as we continue to read through this and study it and talk about it together, that we'd have a better vision of what it means to be made new.